I was at Notting Hill Carnival one August bank holiday, and I looked up, and I'd had a few drinks with some mates, and I looked up and I saw All Saints Road.
Welcome to Clothing Coulture, a fashion industry podcast at the intersection of technology and innovation. I'm Emily Lane.
And I'm Bret Schnitker. We speak with experts and disruptors who are moving the industry forward and discuss solutions to real industry challenges.
Clothing Coulture is produced by Stars Design Group, a global design and production house with more than 30 years of experience. Welcome back to another episode of Clothing Coulture. Today, we're going to be talking with a designer, an entrepreneur, someone who has an illustrious history in this industry of fashion, from creative director at Reiss to founder and chief executive of All Saints, a brand we know and love so well, to a new venture where he's paving the way for a much-needed evolution in this apparel industry, addressing sustainability with his own namesake brand. Stuart Trevor, welcome.
Thanks. Hello.
Hi, I'm so glad to be talking to you. You're one of your early brands, first brand you founded, All Saints, has been a long time favorite of mine. So particularly in the era in which you were leading the charge, I still have all of those garments I bought years ago. So it's a testament to what you developed there.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. So I'd like to kind of start out, you've got this great new project, which we'll definitely talk about. But I'd like to kind of go back to some of those earlier years. At the time, you had really been known for addressing some edgy icons, rock stars, and you'd had some other successes in working for another brand. At what point did you know, it's my time? This is the time for me to start my own brand, All Saints.
Oh, I was wondering which one you were talking about then.
I know, because you've had multiple.
Yeah, I'd done 10 years with at Reiss. I started when I was about 18, I think. I was still at university studying, and I won a Smirnoff Fashion Awards, and I'd won a Paul Smith Mont Blanc competition. I was a finalist in this, and I met Paul Smith, and he offered me an internship. He loved what I'd made, and he wanted. I'd made some suits out of. I turned them inside out, so I put the seams from the inside of the facings on the outside, and I'd taken like a Levi trucker jacket, and I put the pockets and the strips on the outside of a suit, and and then I won a Smirnoff Fashion Award at the Royal Albert Hall, and it was televised. And then David Reiss rang the college about 14 times, and I just ignored him because I'd been offered this internship at Paul Smith, and I that's what I wanted to do. But I was told I had to go to see David Reiss, so I went to see him, and he basically handed me an envelope with £500 in it and a ticket to Pisa, and I was like, "What's this?" And he goes, "Open it," and I'm like. And I was thinking, I'd gone down to London. That I'd been told that I had to go by the university dean of faculty. So I went there. And when I got there, he had the #1 shop on the King's Road, and it was mobbed. You've never seen anything like it. There was 500 people or what seemed like 500 people in this store queuing up. There was a queue of about 40 people at the till buying suits and leather jackets and and I was like, God, this is a serious business. I didn't really realize that. And anyway, so he gave me this envelope, his ticket to. I agreed to go to Florence with him. I looked at the money, and he said, "You don't have to tell Paul Smith like that." So I thought, well, you know what? I'll take the money and I'll go to Florence. He was like, come to Florence with me, and it's the #1 menswear fair in the world, Pitti Uomo. We're going to go to stay in the best hotels in the world. We're going to eat in the best restaurants in the world, and we're going to go to the best fabric mills in the world. And you're going to choose fabric from there, and we're going to go to my factory, and we're going to put it into work, and you'll be in the shop downstairs in about 2 months. And I was like 18. I was like, yeah, all right then. So I
sounds like he had an eye on the prize.
Sorry?
Sounds like he had an eye on the prize.
He did, yeah. He was so, and I'll tell you a funny story, because I I got on the plane and the following week. And
First class, I hope.
No, it wasn't.
Oh.
It was. I think it might
So
have been.
far.
No, it might have been business class, but it was only from England to Italy. So and but I was a kid, and he goes to me like, so what's the big look? What's the big look for next winter? And I just sat there, and it was like one of those moments, and the camera goes like, because they don't teach you anything about what's the big look for next year back in those days at uni. So I just sat there and thought, what am I going to say? So I just described what an external tutor that used to turn up once a week or once a month in Nottingham, and he used to wear trousers that had a little zips in the leg, and he used to wear, and you'll find this funny because this was 1985 or something, and in England we didn't know what a hoodie was. The hoodies didn't exist, but this tutor had a little Levi's hoodie that had a zip, and it had the little kangaroo pocket, and it had the hood and the little. So I was explaining, because I didn't really know. I couldn't say, oh, I think hoodies are going to be big. It was like, so it's like a cardigan, and it's sort of knitted, but it's not knitwear. It's sort of like sweatshirt fabric, and it has a zip, and he's going, oh, that sounds good, and all that, and I said, oh, on a Mac over the top with a little tab on it, and maybe patch pocket, And I remember getting out of the taxi in Florence, and we arrived. I'm thinking, wow, this is amazing. We're staying in a beautiful hotel, 18 years old, never been abroad in my life, really. I was like, wow, this is it. But then he went up the stairs, and I was wandering around in the piazza thinking, well, at least I got a trip to Italy out of it, because I thought, he's going to find out. I haven't got a clue what I'm talking about. And we went round the shops, and Margiela had just launched his first collection. So had Bickenbergs and Dries Van Noten and Anne de Millimeester. And in the window of all the best stores, Louisa Via Roma and all that sort of stuff, there was like hoodies and Macs and trousers with little zips in.
Like you'd planned it.
All the things. And he was like, oh. So we're buying all this stuff, and we're walking around Florence with these, big bags full of designer gear. I've never bought anything in a designer store. I didn't have any money. So we took it back to the hotel, and we walked up the stairs, and he rang the office, and he was like, to ring, to speak. He rang down the hotel, and he said, can you send up a bottle of champagne, some of them little nibbles? And then he said, oh, 1 minute. And he rang the office, and he goes, this boy's a genius. He goes, he got it all right. He's a genius. It's unreal, like that. And then,
was he calling Paul Smith at that moment?
No,
just
he wasn't.
gloating?
No.
Okay.
I had to go and see Paul Smith when I got back and all that. And to be honest, Paul Smith, I asked him, over the summer, when I come and work with you and all that, I'm going to have to pay my, he's like, oh, we don't pay interns, sort of thing. And I'm like, how am I going to live? And this David Rees is offering me 50 quid a day.
Especially now that you're spoiled,
I had no money.
Right.
Yeah, and I'd had the treatment.
Yeah.
But you know what he did as well? When we were in Louisa Via Roma, I tried on a red Gaultier double-breasted blazer made out of red wool gabardine. It was beautiful. Had a silk lining with skeletons on it. And it was about the equivalent of, it was in lira back then, but it was the equivalent of like £750 or whatever, which is probably about £10,000 in today's money.
Sure.
This was 35 years ago. He said, if I buy you that jacket, will you come and work with me? And I went, well, what about Paul Smith? He goes, no, you tell this Paul Smith to do one. He goes, if I buy you that, and I just looked at him and I thought, there's no way he's going to buy that jacket. I went, yeah, all right then. So we shook on it, because I thought there's no way he's going to take me to the shop and get 750 quid out and buy this jacket. And he took me to the shop, and I tried it on, and he started going, are you sure you like it? And, are you sure? And I'm like, I love it, like that. And he went, okay. And he went and he bought it like that. And then that was it. So then I was stuck.
It's a nice signing bonus.
It was nice, yeah. So, but I carried on. I did a year at uni, and I did my degree, and then I left, and I joined him, and he just allowed me to do whatever I wanted virtually. And we were working with the best fabric mills in Italy. We were making most of it in Italy. I went over to Hong Kong with him, and we found the factories that were making like the most amazing product in Hong Kong, and I got on amazingly well with them all, We went back and we did Paris Fashion Week. We went to New York. We did New York Fashion Week with Reese, and we sold it to Barney's New York, Bergdorf's, Saks Fifth Avenue, Nordstrom, Fred Siegel, you know, every Maxfields. We were selling to every, you know, and then in Japan we were selling to Seibu and Barney's Japan and all, you know, and I was like the whole time thinking, God, if I can do this for him, I could do this for myself. So I just wrote down, you know, all the different clients, all the names of the buyers and how much, you know, Barney's we were doing, I don't know, $500,000 a year or something. So I wrote, if I do about 250 with them, and if I half it, if it was undermine it, and I went to the bank, and the bank just went, well, we're not going to give you any money. And then one of the Chinese, Hong Kong-based factories came to see me and said, listen, we love you, and we want you to come and represent us. We're doing about 10 million a year. We're going to give you 10% of the turnover if you come and join us and leave. And I was like, how much are you going to give me? And they went 10%. And I'm like, million? Like, if you've got that much money, I've got a business plan to show you. So I showed them the business plan, and I asked all the buyers from Harrods and Selfridges and Harvey Nichols and Barney's and all that. I'd written down ST, Mr. Saint, my initials are ST, like Simon Templar, right. Which was a James Bond type character from the 60s, played by Roger Moore before he became James Bond. And when I was 20, I bought the car that was in, not the actual one, but the same model car, the Volvo P1800. It looks like a Carmen, it looks like the Aston Martin DB5. Mm-hmm. And so from about 20 years old, I used to drive that everywhere, and everywhere I went, everyone was like, oh, it's the Saint, it's the Saint. And so I had the Saint, I had Mr. Saint, I had ST, and I was at Notting Hill Carnival one August bank holiday, and I looked up, and I'd had a few drinks with some mates, and looked up and I saw All Saints Road. And I thought, All Saints, that's actually, if someone asked you, where's your jacket from? And you said, oh, it's the Saint or whatever. All Saints just flows. So I registered the name. And so I got a letter back from the intellectual property company saying that there was a conflict of interest with the NFL. So I wasn't going to take that as a no. So I wrote I got the telephone. I found out that they had a European office, and I made an appointment to go and see them, and I presented them with what I wanted to do. And very luckily for me, the guy was really cool, and he was like, do you know what? As long as you don't do American football, you can go away, and he wrote me a letter out there and then and gave me. So I registered the name All Saints and launched the first collection, and it was quite, and I showed it at Paris at the same show that I used to show Reese, and all the buyers that I sold Reese to came around. I didn't even, do you know what? I remember at the time actually being too scared to write to them. Reese was quite an intimidating. I was kind of thinking, I'm not going to contact them and invite them. I thought if they find me, they find me. And anyway, they all found me. And it was quite funny because a friend of mine was still working there. And David, he used to say to me, we used to argue quite a lot about something. He used to call the things, because he was quite a classic gentleman in a navy blazer with a white Oxford button down and a shirt and tie and a pair of chinos and a Baswegian loafer. And I was doing all these bomber jackets and little sort of like, little zip, little cool items and things. He used to call it cheap disco rubbish and all that. And I used to laugh, but because that's what sold. So my new collection, and then all the buyers came around and they said, "Oh, David, where's the kid? Where's your guy?" And he's dead. He actually told them he's dead. He's dead, like that. And they were like, "What?" And then they walked around the corner. And they saw me. And they're like, "Oh my God!"
Risen from the dead.
Yeah, they're like, it's the All Saints is risen from the dead.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ! And so they went, and they actually went back to dead. David, he's just round there. What are you on about? He's dead. He goes, cheap disco rubbish. He won't deliver. I promise you, he won't deliver.
Oh my gosh!
And all that. And I think we wrote something like $1 million at that show, with all the best buyers. In the first ever show, we did something like 2.5 million in the first season, and we delivered it, and then you got your second album. Mm-hmm. So and that went even better, and everybody received everything and it sold out and yeah, we were off.
Oh my gosh. That was quite a ride for a while, and then eventually you sold the company. What led you to that decision to sell All Saints?
Oh, there's a funny story about that. We'd gone from halfway through, I think 1994 is when I started. Around 2000, there were issues with the Chinese factory. What happened in 97? They when Hong Kong went back to the Chinese, all the property prices devalued by 50%. So the Chinese run out of money because they'd funded everything, the meteoric rise. We were doing about, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 million. They were funding it all off of their property, like, you know, as collateral with the bank. But the bank called in the money. So I had to swerve away from them, and I brought in the ex-retail director from Reese as a business partner, and we put some money in. We decided not to wholesale anymore because the margins were tight, and we just opened, I think we opened in 6 months another 6 stores. I already had 3, 4, and we opened another 6. And the business just kept going from, like, you know, 6 million to 8 million to 10 million to 40, you know. Mm-hmm. And then we had about 14, 15 stores. And this partner of mine, the ex-retail guy, decided he'd made a decision that he was going to put in a no relationship policy within the staff of the business. And it was kind of weird because we had the coolest rock and roll brand in the world. And he decided in his wisdom that no one was allowed to sleep with each other, or, you know, and so I was ringing the Manchester shop trying to speak to the manager, and they're like, oh, he's not here. I'm like, where is he? He goes, he's been suspended. I'm like, what? I didn't know anything about this. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to ring the guy in Birmingham. So I rang the guy in Birmingham. He's been suspended. The area manager's been suspended. So's the girl that's doing all the window.
Oh,
they're all suspended on. And I'm like, this is good. What the hell's? And he went, I've told them that they're not. And I'm like, you're not going to stop these young. You've got all these really cute, cool model type guys and girls working. They're all. I'd rather they were sleeping with each other than sleeping with Paul Smith's staff or Ted Baker's staff, or, you know. I'd rather they were all hanging out. And anyway, I was approached by someone else at the time, and he offered to buy out this partner, and he did. And then within about a year and a half, he had majority share, and they wanted to move all the production to China. They wanted to they wanted to shut down all the stuff I was doing in the UK, and I just didn't like any of that. I didn't want to do that. I loved the fact that we had made in England and that we were still doing tailoring in Italy and jeans in Italy, and they didn't want to do all, and I think at the same time as well, there was like the Iraq war had gone off, and then in London there was these 4 bombers blew themselves up on the tube.
Yeah,
I think they called it the 7-7. And I remember thinking, God, if they're going to bring the war to England, and I remember the morning that happened, I was waiting for people to arrive at the studio, and some people didn't turn up. And I remember thinking, I'm going to have to ring their mum. Fortunately, none of them were. They were on the tube at the previous station, so everyone was fine. But I just remember thinking, I just kind of had a feeling that maybe it's a good time to get out. So I did, and that was in 2006, 2007, and of course in 2009 the crash came.
Yes.
And I don't know whether it was a premonition or whatever, but I didn't want to be. I'm risk averse, and I just didn't want to have to go through all of that. And so it seemed like a good idea at the time, and I didn't really want to do it. But, you know, once you're not in control and someone else is telling you how to run your business, I just didn't want to do that. Yeah. So I decided to move on, and
and like every entrepreneur, you came up with something else.
I just did, yeah. I think
right.
I used to, you fall off the bike, and then you just, get up again and you get another bike. And so I launched another one, and I did another 10 years with Stuart Trevor. Mm-hmm. And in that period, at that period, for some reason was the one where I dressed all the rock bands. Virtually every rock and roll band in the world would come to me specifically, and we had more success dressing rock stars than we did selling clothes.
That had to be fun, though.
It was great fun, yeah.
Did you get like just calls up saying, "Hey, I need stuff"?
Well, so I was telling you earlier, we had I used to experiment with things and I discovered some fabric. I used to love to make like white dinner jackets like Brian Ferry used to wear. And I discovered this fabric that had a sort of Teflon coating, and you could get red wine and pour it on it, and it would just... So I made these white suits. Of course, nobody bought them, and we had them in the studio, and I got a phone call from
Brian Ferry had 1,000, probably. Brian Ferry had a couple of them. 1,000, yeah.
And a stylist rang me to say that she was dressing a band called Kasabian for the front cover of the NME, and did I have any white suits? And I went, you never guess what. So she came and she got these white suits and a load of other stuff, and they did the front cover of the NME, and it was with... They called it Beggar's Banquet, so it was like Rolling Stones inspired with a goat's head soup, and they were wearing white suits and top hats and canes and red silk scarves and things like that, all things that I had sitting in my studio.
Including the goat's head?
I did have yes, because I used to, the ram skull, the All Saints ram skull, came because I had ram skulls, and I did have goats' heads, and I had a lot of taxidermy back then. I had like a hawk and I had an eagle and a swan, and I still got them.
That had to be an amazing studio.
So the Kasabian crew went to meet Roger Daltrey from The Who for Teenage Cancer Trust. They were playing at the Royal Albert Hall, and unbeknown to me. So I get a phone call, and it's, hello, mate. And I'm looking at the phone thinking, he goes, it's Roger. And for some reason, I knew it was Roger Daltrey. And because I'd no idea, nobody told me. He goes, listen, I've got something really huge. I said, yeah, go on. He goes, I can't tell you what it is. He goes, but it's huge. It's bigger than you can believe. He goes, but I've signed an NDA. Can't tell you what it is. I goes, what is it? He goes, it's a Super Bowl. So I'm like laughing my head off, like thinking.
You twisted his arm.
Well,
not really.
I don't know. He just, I wouldn't trust him with any secrets.
That's right.
Anyway, so he came to see me. And I was wearing I had made a jacket out of this really beautiful Italian fabric that had big, thick sort of boating stripes on it. And it was lined with a Union Jack and it had zip teeth around the edge. And I brought all these other things and I'd laid them all out. And Roger walked in and he just looked at me and he goes, come on, come on. And he made me take the jacket off and he put it on and he started doing this. And I was like, what are you doing? He goes, what do you think I'm doing? I said, I've got no idea. And he goes, I'm swinging the mic. So and of course, if you can watch the Super Bowl halftime show with The Who, and he does the whole wearing my jacket, throws the mic up the air, catches it, and singing and all that sort of stuff. And then a couple of years later, he rang me. He goes, "I've got something even bigger." I went, "What's that?" He goes, "It's."
Can't tell you.
He said, "I can't tell you." NDA like that. I goes, "What is it?" He goes, "The Olympics." So they closed the ceremony of the Olympics in 2012 wearing another one of my jackets. Then I had to go and meet him at Mark Knopfler's studio in Chiswick, so Dire Straits and all that. And so Mark stood there and Roger's there and I brought all these things and he goes, "Come on." Then he just he just made me take off my jacket and put it on and he wore it. And it was funny because I was covered in little...
Is that why you're wearing two jackets today? Because you're afraid someone will take it right off your body?
Because it's freezing in it's freezing in St. Louis. It was about 2 foot of snow when we arrived.
Yes.
And it's all gone now, though. But anyway. So, yeah.
That's so great. I love how you kind of stayed open to the new opportunity. All from the time you were graduating all the way through. It's like you never know what door is going to open, but it's great that you've stayed kind of present and open for those opportunities. Because what extraordinary chances you've had.
I mean, it's people say to me a lot like, "Oh, it's all right for you. You founded All Saints," like as if it was a
An easy joy
easy
ride,
joy.
yeah.
Like I was just like, sitting in the back of a Bentley with my driver, taking me to and from work every day. I have been on a roller coaster all my life. It's up and down, and none of it's been easy. It's a lot of really, really hard work and managing your way through, stress and duress and hard times. And, and that's kind of like, I used to kind of never really talk about it years ago. A lot of people, and I realized after a while that actually, I don't want everybody to think I've had an easy life. I don't mind telling them that I've actually worked really, really hard and I've managed businesses through ups and downs, because that's actually the most difficult or the most rewarding part, is getting through the obstacles. I used to say that running a fashion business was like being a dog at Crufts. Crufts is like the dog show where the dog has to go in and out of the cones and up over the things and then through a hoop around, because there's so much that needs to be done. It's not easy at all. Everybody, general public, they walk in a shop and they pick up a shirt or a pair of trousers, a leather jacket, and they think, oh, yeah, I love it. There's so much that goes into it all. You've got to get it all made beautifully and correctly, and you've got to get the buttons and the trimmings and the buttons, and they can't fall off, and the lining can't rip, and you've got to get everything. It's a lot. It's a lot harder than anybody would ever imagine.
And the world is a complicated place. Everyone thinks when they see these large brands, the trajectory was just kind of even. And the real world is ups and downs, like you mentioned. It's I think so much of success is perseverance, right? You have a passion, you love what you do, but you have to have perseverance to survive.
Yeah. It's a people business, and people are less than perfect. So, in those challenges, I was just talking to friends the other day. It's how we overcome these challenges that really make us who we are. It's really the fascinating part of our stories. Yeah. So, in these lessons that you've learned, through some of those hardships, are there some core principles that you carry with you that are like, these are the things that are the difference between the people who have the opportunity to really make it versus those who might suffer? That sounded harsh, didn't it?
I don't want to stress about the hardship and all that, because I tell you what, I've had a fantastic time. I've just had the whole thing's been a lot of fun, and I mean, there are. It's not an easy ride or whatever, but I've had party after party and lots of fun and traveled the world, and we've been to so many different beautiful countries, and I've had a really great time, and I'm still having a great time and all that. And my ambition as a kid was to create the greatest rock and roll brand in the world. And I still haven't done that. I'm still on that mission. So, this is hopefully what I'm going to do with the new brand.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit. Your namesake, your eponymous label, Stuart Trevor. A few years ago, we've talked about this multiple times on the podcast, how over the years we've been pretty negative about what we see as a reality in sustainability for this space. I know, Bret, you've had a few platforms that you've talked about.
I have. I think it's the industry's largest failure. I mean, out of 111 million metric tons of fiber and textiles end up in landfills every year. People think that you can just turn on the light switch and switch to a sustainable kind of initiative. Only 13% of any fabric out there is available in anything sustainable. And every time we have conversations, it's like this exclusive club. You have to check the boxes and you have to meet minimums. And last I looked, we were trying to change the world for the better. And it's such a challenge when I look at all of these different, things that we're looking at to try to overcome our future.
And we're seeing some positive transformation, which is exciting. And to address some of the need for a bigger conversation here, I saw one of your statistics, Stuart, on your site of every 7 minutes, a pile the height of Mount St. Everest.
Mount Everest,
Mount Everest,
Yes, Saint is in my head.
St. Everest, all saints.
Yes, is being discarded and heading for the landfills.
That's
every 7 minutes.
That's astounding.
Terrifying.
I produced a deck for investors, and And that was one of the statistics on there. And my daughter, who's 19, said, Dad, you can't put that. And I'm like, why? And she said, well, because you can't just make things up like that. I said, I haven't made that up. She went, well, that can't be true. She goes, and I went, what do you mean it can't? She said, if that was true, kids would stop buying clothes like that. I went, come here, let me show you. And I showed her where I'd got the information from. She's like, what are we going to do? Yeah. I'm like, what are we going to do? Well, about 5 years ago, I started working with mentoring young startup brands that have a positive social or environmental impact. And they kind of taught me, these young kids were kind of teaching me about sustainability and about these facts. And I see it getting worse year on year. And I was speaking to investors on their behalf. And all these investors were like, do you know what? I used to love All Saints, but I don't like it. It's not the same. Why don't you do another brand? And I was like, the last thing the world needs is another clothing brand. And they would go, but I love what you're wearing. And I'm like, I only wear vintage. And they're like, well, I've never seen a jacket like that before. And I embroider it and I patch it. I add things to it. And they're like, well, why don't you do that? And so I went back to see them and they asked me, and then another one would be like, why don't you do another brand? And I'm like, I said, what about a clothing brand that doesn't produce any clothes? And they were like, what do you mean? And I'm like, there's so much clothing in the world. We could go 6 generations and we don't have to produce another garment and we'd still have enough clothing to go round, because people have wardrobes full of, I mean, I don't know, we've all probably got 30 pairs of jeans in our wardrobe and 10 leather jackets and whatever, and we never wear them. And so what I've done now is I've set up, the idea is that my new brand starts out with 99% of it is vintage pieces that I have curated. There's a warehouse in London, there's one in Liverpool, there's one in Plymouth, there's in America, in France. The one in London that I go to is 80,000 square meters, and it has probably 1 million garments in it. And in there, you can go in there and you can pick up Korean War era parkas from US military. You can get M45 field jackets. I can get 200 of them. And I at the moment, I'm buying 10s and 20s, and I patch them up and I over dye them and I embroider. I've got a factory in Leicester, and we have the machinery. We do all the embroidery for the inside of Aston Martins and Bentleys and Land Rovers and Range Rovers, and people nowadays, they can, wealthy clients, they want their own signature initials embroidered on the seat. This machinery exists, and we can embroider on demand. So we're doing like chain stitch embroidery, and we're doing, beading and the sort of varsity letters with the chenille, and we're adding. So we're taking existing pieces. It could be like a suit jacket or a blazer, and we're adding like, thorns or flowers or, animal, and embroidering directly on the garments. We're probably going to end up doing it where people could send me a picture of their pet and we could embroider that onto the garment or whatever. But, all of the clothes already exist, and all I'm doing is trying to make something more interesting out of them. And I've got an artist, I've got several artists now that I work with, and they hand paint things directly onto the garments. We use like a fabric medium and acrylic paint, and we paint directly onto the garments. And these artists are doing it. They don't really want any money. I pay them a small amount of money, but they love it because they've now got a walking billboard with their art on it, and it looks really cool. One of the artists, I met a kid in a gallery in Margate. His name's Timothy Midnight. He comes from Sandpoint in Idaho, in the Rocky Mountains, and he ended up in Margate with the Libertines, Pete Doherty and Carl Barat. They're a rock and roll band from England, and they were like, he's hanging out with them, and they're rolling little cigarettes and going outside and smoking them, and they've got a martini. He rang his mum, and he's like, Mum, I'm hanging out with cats who smoke. And his mum's like, whoa, that sounds cool. You should paint that. So he painted these cats with red boots on with a little cigarette and in a martini glass. And I really liked it. And I said, can you paint some of that on the clothes? And then because I've got all this vintage military, I said, why don't we do cats who care and all that? He said, why? And I said, because we are cats who care. Yeah. So we now have the cat holding the world in its hand, and I've dropped the cigarette. I don't like smoking. I'm kind of anti-smoker, but I don't mind cats who smoke.
Right.
Actually,
They have 9 lives anyway, right?
Or dogs, yeah.
Yes,
dogs
right.
that drink or play cards.
Yes.
Dogs playing poker. And so now we've done all that, and I've got other artists now contacting me saying, can I paint on your stuff? And so I mean, it's early days. We've just started out. We realized as we went through, we were taking vintage T-shirts and hoodies and things, but we realized that, you know, underwear, socks, but also T-shirts, things that people sweat in, some people, they're not going to wear them. So I sourced the most sustainable 100% GOTS certified organic cotton and 50% recycled cotton and 50% organic cotton T-shirts and hoodies and things like that. So we are going to take pieces, but we buy them from someone who holds stock. So I don't go to the factory, because that was the biggest issue as well in the world, is especially after COVID, a lot of the factories turn around and say, we now want 1,000 pieces per color. Yep. And the buyers, I mean, of course, when they go to do the buying, you know, the black is going to probably be the best seller, and then maybe grey marl, and then maybe white. But then what if they want sky blue and pink? They've got to order 1,000 pieces of a color. Well, some of that isn't going to sell. So what do they do with it? They sell it off to
discounters,
TK Maxx or whatever, you know, and or it ends up, well, people, some of them were sending it off to landfill, and they got caught and all that, because there was kids putting tags in, Apple tags in garments at H&M and Burberry and all that, and they found it all in the desert in Chile and things, you know. So, and it's horrendous, and it's, you know, clothing mountains Amazing. And mountains. So I'm trying to do something about it. So I mean, I'm not saying that, you know, all the factories have got to close and all the, you know, nobody should produce any more clothes. Of course, that's going to carry on, but maybe we should stop making everything out of polyester, because, you know, we don't need. I mean, you know, this one of the biggest lies of all is that sportswear manufacturers say that it needs to be made out of polyester because it wicks the sweat away. That's a lie. There's only one reason why they make everything out of polyester, is it's cheaper. Mm-hmm. You know, they could be making everything out of 100% organic cotton. I know professional runners, and they run in 100% merino wool, because that's the best garment, very lightweight, for people to you know, proper athletes to wear. You know, they don't wear polyester. Because, you know, when you go to the gym and you work out and you sweat, and you know, how long you 30 minutes? 45 minutes, and then you take it off and you get in the shower and you put on fresh clothes. So, you know, it's not like as if, why is everything made out of polyester? That's oil and gas.
Yeah, you know, it's amazing. Some of the statistics are saying that about 55% of all apparel is made in synthetics, polys, nylons, etc. And that number's only going to rise with the issues with the Xinjiang cotton. They're thinking 75, 85% is now going to be in synthetic. And, you know, that has a landfill life of 300 years.
Yeah, I don't
it just
think
doesn't biodegrade, and it's such a frustrating situation. And I think that until the major polyester producers of the world find a biopoly, one that, you know, actually degrades in a landfill, and there's a few things happening along that path.
There's a thing I read recently about some scientists had some sort of microbe enzyme.
There's a new enzyme,
and they'd put it in a plastic bag in the office or in the laboratory or whatever. And when they went to pick it up a week later, they realized that the bag had a hole in it, and the enzymes are eating through the polyester. So they're now trying to culture these enzymes so that they can maybe have a solution to that. But this could be years down the line.
That's the thing. We all look at it, and, you know, by 2025, they say we're going to use the resources of 2 Earths. And last I remember, we had 1.
And that's right around the corner.
And that's close. And so when you take a look at all these different signs and conditions, there needs to be some acceleration of thought process. And I think what I've kind of distilled after kind of looking at all these different directions is that all of these different things that are occurring, upcycling, you know, they talk about slow fashion nowadays, you know,
Yeah.
As an American, I remember going to Italy and Florence and looking at, the guys that were construction guys in the streets working, and they had their one Armani suit that was $1,200, and they had it for their life.
Yeah.
That was their investment in a really nice piece. And there's a lot of conversation about if we shift to slow fashion, if we buy intentionally, and we wear these pieces as things that we would wear in our lifetime at higher levels, one, the industry can be supported. We're producing less garments. We're not throwing things away. But I think as the West gets more aware of that, all of a sudden consumerism is exploding in the Far East.
Yeah.
And you look at the conditions that are going on there, and are we going to be enough to make a difference when you have basically 3.1 billion people that are embracing fast fashion, in a consumer?
I think there's going to be a move away from it, though. I mean, so Vivienne Westwood, who we all love, she used to say, buy less, buy better, and wear things for life. And they used to think she was mad. How can you be saying that when you're producing clothing and all that? But she was right.
She was right.
And she didn't mean, buy... I mean, I just think she was 100% right. And I think that... but the big problem is that the corporations are always, the $1 billion corporations are chasing the $2 billion corporations.
You're right.
And they're overproducing, and they're encouraging people to buy more. And they're also, they're gambling. They don't reactively buy. There's a changer coming.
There is, I agree.
I'm speaking to manufacturers in Portugal that make all the production for Canada Goose and Balenciaga and Armani, and they're aware that in the next 5 to 10 years, Gen Z, that these kids are going to move away from fast fashion. I mean, there are still going to carry on. There's loads of people that don't give it.
Yeah.
And they'll carry on. But I think there is, apparently there's a statistics going around that 62% of Gen Z love vintage clothes and buying sustainably. So I'm all for that.
And it sounds like you've figured out a way. I've always looked at upcycling and vintage clothing, and I'm like, how do you get it to a level where, how do you scale it to a level to meet demand?
That's what they all ask me. They come in and they ask me because they're like, how are you going to scale this? I mean, I'm not in it for money. I've never been interested. Although I do know that this new brand could easily reach, become $1 billion business.
Yeah.
Because it's the future, I believe. And so people ask me, how are you going to scale it? I mean, if I want 10,000 pairs of Levi's tomorrow, I can make a phone call now and I can get 10,000 pairs of Levi's.
You have to ship it from the middle of the desert, I suppose. But.
Well, no, there's in America, and in Canada, there are people, and there are warehouses a lot of it gets shipped over to, other countries and sorted and you can get it back. I mean, the last thing we need to worry about is am I going to have enough stock to upcycle? Yeah. That's the last thing we need to worry about.
Yeah.
And the idea of, painting it or embroidering it or printing it or whatever, that's easy. I mean, how many garments do you need to do a day? I've got a little factory in London. We make these little jackets from dead stock fabric. Everywhere I go, I've got a fabric mill in Veneto. It's got 42 million meters of fabric and all that on rolling. You can get whatever you want. And I make these, I only make so I am making some new stuff. I take dead stock fabric and I turn it into living stock.
But that's actually a way to really scale. If you're thinking, there's so much fabric out there. Every day,
millions and millions of meters.
I get emails all the time about, 100,000 meters of this and 200,000 meters of that.
Yeah.
And so even from the point of upcycling fabric is a wonderful idea because at least it's not ending up in a landfill. You're managing to find
people ask me about that, and I because a lot of people don't know, but we know because we're in the fashion business. So someone needs 10,000 max, and there's 3 meters in a mac. That's 30,000 meters of cloth. But the fabric mill doesn't make 30,000 meters. They make 10% more because there's always faults.
Yeah.
And every meter of cloth goes over a light box, and they find a fault, and they tie a little string on the end of the roll.
3-point inspection.
And you find these rolls. If the rolls have more than 20 little strings on it, that roll is discarded.
Yeah.
So that goes. It used to go to landfill. Burberry were caught out for burning their fabric, but they can't do that anymore. It's illegal. So I can go in, and there's quite an interesting story there. You know the phrase "no strings attached," and that becomes from the olden days when a tailor used to say, "Send me 10 meters of cashmere, no strings attached."
Unbelievable.
That's where it comes
Oh my
from.
gosh.
I am now 62 and I've just learned something new.
I didn't learn it about a month
That's
ago.
killer. Awesome.
Wow. Well, that's great. I love hearing what you're doing, and it really does help me see how you can offer something that's more bespoke, more customized, but really...
Well, we realized as well, so what I was doing is, so a lot of these parkas and field jackets, I was buying vintage varsity letters, because quite a lot in the rag market, people, you get the cardigans and the sweaters, and they're all moth-eaten. So they, you can get the letters. And I was buying, I bought up like a couple of hundred of these, and I was sticking them on the parkas and on some sheepskin shearling coats and things like this. And when I realized, we only launched in September last year, we realized that the people that were buying it were buying their initial. So there's a shielding that I sold for £600 or something, and it was with an F on it, and someone called Faye bought it. A Parker with a W, somebody called Warwick bought it. So I realized now, so that's when I invested in this machine that can remake these varsity letters, and so people can now go on my website and they can choose the garment and they can put their initial on there, and if their name is Stuart Trevor, they can have an S and a T or whatever. So we're trying to develop things like that. So we take vintage pieces and we create it's almost like a walking work of art. And I actually put a little label on the back of everything. I used to go to all the old what are they called, like costume houses, and I borrowed once the frock coat that Marlon Brando wore in Mutiny on the Bounty, and it had a little white patch on it that was zigzagged on, and it had Paramount Studios, Marlon Brando, Lot 1, Scene 72,
cool.
and all this sort of stuff. So I've made this little label with Stuart Trevor, and I sign it, and if it's a one-off piece, I'll write lot, it's got lot, and I write one of one, and if the model, and it says model on it, and if your name's Glenn or Rick, or you model Rick or model Susan, whatever, and I date it, and so every single piece is going to be signed and dated. So it's almost like a work of art sort of thing.
And the trend is personalization. So you're playing into both.
Someone said to me, "How
trends.
are you going to do that? How are you going to do that?" Well, I could just sign 1,000 of them or whatever. I mean, at the moment we're only selling like 10, 20, 30 pieces a week or whatever. But so it's very easy. But even if, when we get up into the thousands or whatever, it's not that, none of it's that difficult.
Yeah.
It used to be when I was doing Reese and doing All Saints, and, it used to be that I would buy vintage to get the creative juices flowing. Now it is the creative juice.
It is, you're right.
I've cut out the middleman. I've cut out the bit where I send it off to the factory and they send it back and I order 500 and wait for it to arrive or whatever. We just get the one piece and sell that, and then, but someone said to me as well, how are you these military pieces, that the American military spend $5 billion a year on clothing. That's every year since 1945. There's millions of garments.
Right.
There's no way we're going to run out. I mean, if we do run out, then great.
Yeah.
I'll retire.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Stuart, for joining us today. It was great to hear your story and learn about this amazing new brand that
follow me on Stuart Trevor Official on Instagram, and have a look at stuarttrevor.com.
Absolutely.
And let me know what you think.
I'm going to go shopping online.
Yeah, come and have a look.
Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe to stay apprised of upcoming episodes of Clothing Culture.
Awesome.
Hey.
Thank you, Stuart.
Enough.
I